Hi, I'm Graham Nolan, a Do the Work co-chair alongside Kate Wolf, and I oversee storytelling and partnerships for the organization. You're joining the premiere office hours episode of the launch week for Do the Work. Yay! And this short intro period will be the last part of this show where I'm the only person on screen, I promise. First off, thanks to Ira Madison and Aaron Walton for leading off all of our programming yesterday with a brilliant discussion on how queer creativity advances business. We learned a lot about ourselves, we learned a lot about Toni Braxton, it was great. Before we jump in and join a group grid conversation here on Zoom, Do the Work as a queer creative community and platform, empowering the ad industry and marketers alike to inspire, reward, and celebrate queer creativity within the advertising and marketing culture. We know that active culture for queer talent unleashes untapped creative potential to advance business. When we're ourselves, everyone wins. We must celebrate and appreciate that point specifically. During a time where people are fighting like never before for the chance to be themselves and exist happily and freely. People who get to be themselves make amazing things happen, and barriers to self-expression and safety must be demolished. To spell it out, we stand in solidarity with the efforts and progress of the Black Lives Matter movement and thank the queer people of color who led the way for progress at the Stonewall Uprising and celebrate those who continue to champion for equality. We rescheduled our launch week to make more room for those more pressing conversations around important systemic change. And though we feel it's important to advance these focused discussions for the queer ad community, especially during Pride, we have to consider what we're discussing in the context of what's happening right now. This is an unprecedented moment in history. Uncomfortable growth is a necessity. Honest discussion is essential. Imperfect steps towards progress are the only way we move ahead. We will maintain focus on our mission in this forum, but remain mindful of how people are feeling and how our efforts here must ladder up to larger systemic progress as we march forward together. This is an interactive opportunity to learn from other people in the community and also share your perspectives. Here's what you can expect. Once I share a little bit more about today's topic, we switch to grid view. And when you want to speak up, press the button to raise your hand. At the bottom, it's a little hand raising button. Our moderator, Jake, will turn your mic up so you can join in. After about a minute of your commentary and input and ideas, respectful to people completing their points, we move on to the next person with their hand raised, basically sort of chosen at random. Please quickly say your name and pronouns if you'd like before your first time speaking, as you're inspired to ask other specific questions. We'll have Q&A in the last 10 minutes. I can answer questions then that are directed towards me, or anyone else can jump in on that discussion as well. There's so much ground to cover here, so I'm going to try to keep every discussion topic to 5 to 7 minutes. Apologies in advance if anyone doesn't get to chime in on a specific topic they care about. This is the first of many discussion forums staged by Do the Work, and other weeks of programming will let you dive into each. You are asked to be respectful. You are asked to be honest. Creativity is a positive energy, so to support that, we do have some ground rules. Your commentary can be honest and challenging, but also preferably be kind. Keep it focused on how we change the work, talent, and culture of advertising, which is a broad topic, so you should have no troubles there. Can you swear? Weird question, but it comes up. Yes, within reason. We're adults, but expletives said for emphasis are cool, and directed swearing is not. So no name calling and no personal negativity. And when it feels right, compliments are free, and they celebrate creative thinking. Our audience is going to fluctuate in size a little bit over the course of this discussion. It's our first episode. We are experiencing some challenges with getting all of our links in order, but for people who join us as we go along, we're figuring it out, and the conversation will continue. A lot of our court for Do the Work is here, so if you see a lot of people sitting around who aren't quite saying as much, it's because we want to hear from those of you who are joining our discussions for the first time, but also if the discussion remains small, all of our court members can jump in. This is a first episode covering the reason we exist. It may be a little chaotic, but we will get as many perspectives as possible. Housekeeping items done, let's get into this. The first question I want to direct to all of you, prefacing it with our mission. Our mission is to increase queer creativity, representation, and share of voice in the advertising industry. So the question for the group is, where do you see queer creativity connecting our work with brands to larger culture? So, or to rephrase, how are our queer ideas breaking through to the mainstream, specifically through ads and marketing? So if anyone would like to sort of join in, that would be great. Who do we have? Can I see who we have? I can.
I'm happy to join in.
Yes, go for it.
Well, yeah, but I'm the other co-chair just to keep the conversation going. I think queer culture in general has been dictating pop culture for a very long time. More specifically, I would say even queer people of color have been dictating. I mean, the vernacular that they have formed, and if you think about things like even the word work, has found its way into pop culture across the board. And I think that vernacular has been dictating how brands then approach culture and feel like they're speaking the right language. And we're seeing that throughout, whether that's like, you know, the birth of RuPaul's Drag Race and having that hit mainstream. But that language had existed well before it. So it's just something to think about. That's kind of my 2 cents. Oh, did I lose you? You're on mute.
I was on mute. Yeah. Again, this is the first episode. Little things that we get to work out. Does anyone else have any examples of where they're sort of seeing queer culture come to life specifically through advertising and marketing? Oh, we have a hand raiser. Talking permitted.
Oh, do I talk?
Yeah, talking permitted. That was like Star Trek talk. That's real talk.
Hi. Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, beyond any specific creative examples, I think the most encouraging sign of queer inclusivity of the last 10 years that I've seen, to Kate's earlier point about RuPaul's Drag Race, is the lack of silos and how ads are distributed, right? Like it used to be 10 years ago, you would just see queer inclusive advertising in queer media, whether it was on logo or, you know, in Out or The Advocate, right? And now it's everywhere. Now you see same-sex couples in State Farm ads, you see trans models and trans individuals in Gillette ads, and, you know, any type of beauty commercial. So I think the mainstream distribution of queer inclusivity is just as important as the inclusive representation itself.
Yeah. What do you, I want to ask in a direct response to that, because when these conversations sort of come through, they sort of form around like the big things, like the big iconic moments and stuff like that. This is not a question I had saved for later, but like, what did you think of the Super Bowl and how queer the Super Bowl was?
This year in particular, or in general?
I thought this year's Super Bowl was very weird, and it seemed to like bounce from like right-wing political ads to some of the queerest ads I'd ever seen during a football game. What do you think that all says about about the progress that we're making in terms of using brands to to elevate our voice?
Yeah, I mean, it says a lot. I mean, first of all, it acknowledges that queer people tune in for the halftime show where many of our biggest heroes, from J-Lo to Beyonce, have performed in recent years, right? And it also, I mean, the NFL until 7 years ago didn't even have a female targeting strategy. So we've come a long way in inclusivity of all. Yeah. 2015 was the first time they actively had ads targeted toward females air with CoverGirl.
Well, that's insane. I want to acknowledge really quick, just because, like I said, the attendees are going to sort of like ebb and flow. We have some people who are just sort of who are queer and not in advertising. We have people who are in advertising and not queer, as if you have perspective on these questions, obviously bring your perspective. Don't be shy about sort of joining in and saying what you see. I mean, specifically, if anyone from sort of outside the industry or outside of our specific community wants to weigh in on how they see queer ideas coming to life in advertising, that's a discussion we want to welcome you to. What does, in terms of the ad industry and brands, what does increased queer creativity look like to you? What do you want to see? What's on your wish list in terms of queer ideas being elevated by brands into the mainstream? Oh, we have a hand raised. I love that it says talking permitted. That's so like scary and authoritarian and a little sci-fi. And Jack, what do you have?
Talking is permitted, but is it heard? Can you guys hear me?
That's, yeah. It's heard now, yeah.
Perfect. I think that when it comes to like brands doing queer things, bringing it to the mainstream, I think that it's really important that it starts from within. Like us at agencies or working in-house, I think that having us there and pitching these ideas and having them be heard so it doesn't come across as so pandering, like people are just kind of guessing how we want to do it. And then because it is more natural and organic that way, there's just that like gentle inclusivity of just visibility in places that just everywhere. I don't like any sort of product throwing in like, well, if we have a couple and they're house shopping, why do they have to be a straight couple? And just doing things like that.
And that's like a tricky thing, right? Because I mean, how do you, like a lot of that is like, how does that just happen to work? Like at some point someone has to raise their hand and say like, what if it's a lesbian couple, right? And then they have to be comfortable doing that and make sure they're not going to get eye rolls from anyone in the room.
Right.
Yeah. Anyone else have any like specific wish lists, like, in terms of like queer ideas I've always wanted to see represented with brands, or how come a brand doesn't jump on, to support this group? Does anyone have any sort of wish list thoughts? I think there's a lot of, one of the things that's dominating national conversation right now is, we have a hand raised. Mike. Oh, Jess talking permitted.
Yes, Jess.
Yes, that's
hey,
me. Hello. No, I think the last point kind of brings up something I was thinking about, because I'm a straight woman and, I don't know what I want to see outside of representation. And I think it's a question that we need answered, and it also shouldn't be decided by a bunch of straight people on the project. So for me, it's like, yes, representation, absolutely. But I truly don't know how else can we represent the queer community if it's not, a lesbian couple house shopping. Like, how else can we show that up in our ads?
I have a question, actually. Do you mind if I jump in, Graham? I just
Go for it.
to answer with another question, Jessica, which is casting. I know that for those that work in the agency side or the brand marketing side, casting can be a whole bag of issues in general, and trying to figure out who's the best to display for what brand. And I'm sure everybody's heard this term before, but about 10 years ago, we started to see terminology in casting specs that say things like, ethnically ambiguous, or, that kind of language, which is dictating to people to look for not just white people, right? And I think that was a very important move, but nobody's ever touched on some of the more outward-facing queer looks, feels, things like that. And I think once it starts to find its way, do you think once it starts to find its way into casting, it might change up the dynamic of the roles of which the characters are played? An example is, instead of saying a lesbian couple, if we if we are looking for gender ambiguous people, you wouldn't necessarily need to write in the fact that they were a lesbian couple. I don't know. This is just an example of that, but any thoughts on the casting pieces? Because I think about that a lot when we look at representation.
I just have a little trouble telling. I mean, I have thoughts on all this stuff, but I have trouble who's still raising their hand. It looks like someone is, and I'm wondering if they want to be on this.
Mike raised his hand. I see.
Talking permitted. Did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Mike. I'm the strategy director here for Do the Work, he, him, his. But I think one of the things that speaks to all of that is, for me personally, there's been a lot of conflict with queer-inspired advertising, meaning a rainbow, or like a queer couple. It doesn't necessarily showcase the queer community and the culture. It's more about taking something that is recognizable and placing it in a spot that people would expect it, whether it's the product or whether it's, the commercial. So I think what would help to showcase like queerness within advertising is really showcasing our culture, our art, our music, things that come out of our community that we celebrate within these mainstream ads. So it's not necessarily, two women walking and finding a house. It's two queer women that like may not be the typical, look for a woman in an ad. Maybe it is someone that is a little bit more masculine presenting, or more like of a non-binary approach where they can be very genderqueer. But I think will really help to start to showcase the community in advertising is showing the different parts of it that don't necessarily get as much visibility, and whether that is the things that are within the community that the straight community does not get to see, or just the different types of people that normally are not showcased in traditional advertising.
And that's sort of like a fine line, right? Because it's just like with advertising in general, you want to find, you definitely want to introduce people to something cool and something new. And a lot of times, sort of associate that with the product, but at the same time, you want to give them something that they're familiar with, right? So it's sort of like a weird, and this is what I think just happens in general with people who maybe haven't been around a lot of queer people growing up. What they do is they sort of go like, oh, you're different, but you're just like us. And you have to sort of like find that fine line between like, what is the thing that will sort of expand people's thoughts, but then the element also, if you really want to connect to them and show like, to represent a queer audience is to connect with all people, you have to have like that universal thing too. And at the same time, you don't want to compromise who we are just so that we're lowest common denominator. So it's a really tough balancing act.
Totally. I think, so I had a pitch one time where the brief was a razor for gender mindful people. And that was a very, to the point of, ethically diverse, or, these kind of terms that brands will use to say something without saying something. What I found throughout that, process while we were doing research is there's this really kind of great, campaign from Harry's that I came across where they had some genderqueer people and they showed how they would use razors, whether it was for their face, for their legs, but it was men using it in ways that are traditionally feminine, women using it in ways that are traditionally masculine, and then playing with that across like the spectrum of gender. And it really kind of made me think, okay, so this is something that they did for Pride, but it does feel very queer in that here is a very gendered product that does a very traditionally ungendered thing, which is shaving hair. And they showcase how queer people fit within that in a very interesting way, and a very interesting design system. So I think there's like pieces of it where it's what is the strategy, what is the product, and then what is the design we're using to showcase that queerness, and what is the art, what is the visual direction, what is the language we're using. And I think those things, when they come together, can really make queer creativity and queer advertising take that next step forward, where we're not getting a rainbow tote bag or a rainbow set of sneakers or a rainbow t-shirt. Like, how can we move beyond that and say this is actually inspired by queer people and queer identity, and not just taking one piece of our community, which we all love and really cherish, but seeing what else there is beyond that for our community.
Yeah. I mean, I love that example so much because it speaks so much to what we're about, where you can take the most simple product that has existed forever, strip away its gender constraints, and then the creative possibilities are endless. When you tell me what that brief is, initially my thought was like, what are you supposed to do with that? And then it's like, you can do almost anything with that. So that's a really, really cool example.
Hop in
Yeah.
as a follow-up to what Michael was talking about. Hi, my name's Jake. He, him, his. I am a producer at Droga 5 and one of the programming leads for Do the Work. And I thought what Michael was saying was really interesting. And I think it was a point that was brought up earlier about, a lot of times it's people who are not part of the community speaking to the LGBTQIA plus community, or it's members of the community talking to ourselves. So there's a communication method in which we degender or or remove roles from creative concepts in which anybody can fill that role, and therefore, you're not making a pride stance or an LGBTQIA specific stance. It's more welcoming to the entire group. And I was thinking about that Variety article about public perception changing based on how queer people are represented. And I thought,
Jake, really quick, can you spell that article out and what the implications of it were for people who haven't read it?
yeah, it was just talking about like the more and more that queer people are represented in TV and movies and film or any sort of artful communication as sort of less tokenized and normalized as part of the community or characters for the show, it changes the public's perception of what it means to be part of the LGBTQIA community, that there are varying roles that people occupy, that not everything is a rainbow and glitter and sparkles, and that you see multiple sides to people. And we're constantly showing multiple sides of straight people. So there's a method in which you degender or delabel, remove labels from specific roles, specifically in casting, I think, to really give the role to whomever presents the story the best or can carry the story the best. And it's a fine line between wanting to make sure that you've checked all your boxes, but also you're crafting your story in a careful way. So.
Yeah. Does anyone have any response to anything Jake's mentioned? Something you said, which was not the core of the point, but it's something that you sort of mentioned in passing, but I think it's it's such an interesting and sort of dominant phrase in terms of talking about all these larger dynamics, is the degree to which we talk to ourselves. Because I think, you're mentioning this in the context of not doing that in the work to make sure that, we're able to sort of reach mass with product and reach out to people, and how important casting is to that. But because, again, we have some people who maybe aren't in the agency world, and maybe they're in the advertising industry, but they're still not in the agency construct. I find that whether or not we're talking to ourselves with programming and with employee engagement efforts is a recurring conversation. To what degree are we actively bringing on allies? And there's obviously a very dominant conversation right now about the degree to which we should educate people. I shouldn't have to, but it might be good if I did. For the people who are inside agencies, what do you see people doing effectively to sort of bring allies along to make sure that we can push queer ideas through to the mainstream? Or just in general, to include them in the conversation? Or for allies who are on the phone, how have you been brought in actively? Mike.
So what we've done, and I am a strategist at our GA. I also lead our LGBTQ network, which is our business resource group. But what we've done is we've created a allyship training program specifically to train our employees on everything going on within the queer community. And that goes through language, it goes through do's and don'ts, what you should and should not use as far as terminology goes, recurring kind of pain points for the community and things that we experience. And then we give them some scenarios of how this comes to life, both in our work and in kind of office relations. So whether that's using incorrect pronouns, or if that's, someone makes a comment that's inappropriate, how do you approach these different scenarios and what are the things you can do within that? It's about an hour-long meeting, but what ends up happening is we make it so that way the people that attend can ask some really hard questions that they normally would not feel comfortable doing so. And I think when you get through to the end of it, you start in a place of, I know probably nothing, or maybe I think I know something, but I'm not sure, to, okay, I've now gotten a download and I'm at least a little bit more informed and know who to reach out to should I have a question on something like this. So that way we make sure that we're making competent work that is not tone deaf or potentially harmful to anyone, because people have at least taken that first step. And then from there, we create a Slack channel where they can all share stories or news articles and keep the conversation going. And that way it just creates a kind of ecosystem of thoughts and relearning, because at the end of the day, allyship is not kind of a one-step process. It's something that's continuous. So I think when it comes to bringing our allies along, we have to make sure we're giving them the tools to do so and showing them where to start, or else it's going to be very difficult to get everything right, because there's a lot to get right.
Yeah. That sounds really, structured and focused in a good way, because I think that a lot of, I think there's a lot of like optimism, and sometimes leaders sort of go, oh, well, we've got good people here, so people will figure stuff out. But it leads to a lot of and we don't want to put too much structure in, because we're humans and we don't have to turn everything into a meeting. But then you get a lot of people who are just like, hey, you're gay, let me ask you something. And you're like, wait, did I just become a focus group for an entire huge group of people? And so, to have those channels and to have sort of, that amount of rigor that goes into, figuring out how people should tap in, that's really awesome. So another question, and it's really interesting because, it's something that we've sort of, we talk a lot about internally, is what will representation look like if it increases in our business? So, we have a stat that came from HRC that said 46% of LGBTQ workers remain in the closet. When that when they're not seen in the office, they're not seen in the work that goes out the door. There's also that fine line of, just the same way we talk about it in the work, they could just sort of be a person, but also it's nice to know that they're queer. What does increased representation for queer talent look like within the industry and at the office? And, do you, how does that sort of manifest when people are able to be more comfortable and be themselves? What does it look like?
I could share something that we've done for a few different affinity groups within our agency. We have a series called Beneath the Surface, which is part of our corkboard series, where we hang artwork and inspiring pieces of work on the walls in our office. But for Beneath the Surface, we did two really amazing segments, one for Black History Month and one for Pride of last year, and both had film components, but also beautiful still imagery with quotes or phrases that were really turnkey from individuals' experiences. And this doesn't necessarily solve your question about how to increase people's comfortability in being represented in the agency, but for those who are comfortable, it allowed us to present a different side to every person. You see somebody as I happen to know that they're part of the community, but they're my finance person. You know what I mean? You know them as their role or what they contribute to your work or your daily effort. But to see, you know, in an interview style, somebody really open up about their experience and any discrimination they've experienced, or just give you another side to them that you never get to see, is really powerful. And we, you know, people's photos were posted all over the agency with the quotes next to them. And then we had like a company-wide happy hour where we played the video that we made of everybody. And I think it was really beautiful to see, you know, another layer of somebody that you only know so much about.
Yeah.
I have a comment on that. I to answer, like, what does it look like? I think there are two things happening, and I think the onus is a little bit on everybody that's on this call, everybody that's in the world of marketing and advertising right now. We have this generation coming up, Gen Z, who
I've heard of them.
2/3 of them, identify as LGBTQIA, gender fluid, non-labeled. And they're going to change. Not only are they the largest generation with the largest purchasing power that any generation has ever had before, but they're vocal about their values and what they want to see in the world and the diversity that they demand, not just expect. I think that there is a calling for the people that are before that generation to start creating mentorships and carving paths and creating true reflections of what they want to see and aspire to be. And then knowing that we have this already built army that is coming up, that will be new and green into an industry. They'll know how to identify and they'll know how to talk about it probably better than us, but they won't know marketing and advertising better than us. And so I look to anybody, whether you're a coordinator or a junior level creative or junior producer, all the way to the C-suite. It's time that we start becoming the mentors that this class, this freshman class in the next 5 years that is going to start emerging, can look up to and carve true career paths for those people to rise up in a very clear channel to maintain that queer voice. I think we as a group have done an excellent job of pulling together and finding bits of light where we can kind of carve our way up, but knowing that there's going to be an onslaught of people coming here into this world and into every part of every industry, really. I think we have the ability to show them what they could do and then have them even better that position. That is kind of my thought process through that.
I wish I could, that's really, really interesting. I wish I could remember the person I was talking to. I feel like I was still at Gray and I was telling a story about how someone I knew who was probably only about 10 years older than me had to go with, so he was a gay man and he had to go with his clients to strip clubs and help objectify women, and telling that story to someone and have them bounce back by telling me about how they had a like 22-year-old non-binary colleague who just like stepped in with the attitude of, yeah, this is me. You all get to catch up to this, right? Which is a lot of, again, the national conversation too, which is like everyone has the means to educate themselves. We're all people. We're done taking excuses for why people can't, like, why people can understand the names of every holding company, but then they can't remember pronouns, right? Like, you know, that our ability to mentor in the way that you're talking about will be met with their spirit of I am who I am and I don't need to fit into the old constraints, and that, you know, you can both bring something to that sort of relationship and help each other. Like, that's going to be really exciting, I think.
Totally. And I think also creating a safe space for education. Like, I think that's also super important. Exactly what you're saying, just like making sure people can ask questions without feeling like they're gonna, I think one of the things is sometimes even when you have allies who are 100% true allies, they get nervous about getting the terminology wrong, don't know how to address people. And I think the more we can create a safe place for education, the better, because I think that's an Achilles heel that we have from an allyship standpoint too.
This is a question. So you brought up the stats about the Gen Z folks, the kids, and I mentioned that 46% of LGBTQ workers remain in the closet. At work, 72% of LGBTQ plus individuals think queer ads are tokenistic. But when people make queer ads, the effectiveness is 44% higher. This is all like loose versions of these stats, but they spell out general dynamics. One of the most interesting things to me is I think all of us in our head guess how many queer people there are in the United States. And the composition that I think we probably went back ourselves like 3 different times that I can remember. And we're just like, is that really the number? And everyone can imagine the number in their head right now of what composition of the United States you think queer people comprise. The answer is 4.5. I guess this is like a very big picture question for either people who work in the business or for people who just watch commercials, period, which means all of you. Does it seem like we're 4.5% of the business? I've worked at agencies, because Kate, and I already see you shaking your head, but it was really funny because one time you were just like, oh, don't tell me that you were 4.5% of this agency when you worked there. I'm like, I think it was 10 when I worked there. and it's sort of funny because the Super Bowl, I know that the Super Bowl felt like about 20% queer, but then most most commercials, if I go home to Ohio for a week and I just watch ads, it's like, oh my God, I will never see a queer person. So this is just a very big picture. If we're 4.5% of the population, what do you think, how do you think that's coming through in advertising in proportion of representation? Anyone can answer. Talking will be permitted for those who raise their hand.
Funny.
All right. Oh my God, a hand raised. It's from V. Hi,
Hello.
V. Talking is permitted.
Yay. I would actually, going along with the 4.5%, my question would be, is it more up to where and the time that said advertisements are, I guess, put out there? Because if you think a lot of the advertisements for kids who are going hungry, like the Sarah McLachlan commercials and the Arms of the Angels with the puppies and whatnot, a lot of those are targeted to pregnant women. They come on late at night type of ordeal. So is it not so much that the advertisements don't have a lot of gender queer people, or is it basically where they're actually being advertised? Like you said, you went back to Ohio. I wouldn't imagine there's a lot of queer advertisements that would be there, as opposed to a place like here in Seattle or San Francisco, where there's a higher gay population. So those advertisements are going to come up a lot more because they know they're going to appeal to those types of people, or us in the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, and it's so funny. I just want to quickly jump in. I would love to hear what other people think about that. To me, that rings true in terms of when everyone was going crazy about WhatsApp, and everyone was saying it. So this is 2003?
3, yeah.
Wow, I never saw it. I had to look it up online to find it. And that was where, for me, the point of media fragmentation was really hitting home. And I was just oh, wow, it's not for me. So I'm not seeing it, and it's huge. And I early on became one of those over-the-toppers where I cut the cable cord and started watching everything digitally. I'm always on Instagram. It's kind of it's Instagram or Netflix for me. So I only kind of ever see ads that seem sort of aimed for gay men.
Well, the echo chamber is super real. And perpetuated even more so by the social media algorithms that then populate even user-generated content at you. So depending on what your target segment is, you're going to see a series of advertising in every screen, which by the way is everywhere, that you're in, whether that's a physical screen in the city that you reside into, because people are tribal by nature. They look for their communities and they sit in them. And so I actually think it's up to brands to help bring that to life in a very real way. And I think it's up to brands to stay strong when questioned about LGBT representation in their ads, I can't help but think of, we all know what happened with Hallmark taking down a very simple LGBT, it wasn't even an LGBT ad, it just had a bunch of weddings in it. I think it was for eHarmony, or I can't, I'm sorry, my brain is, it was for maybe a wedding, the wedding website, the Knot. They had a series of ads. One of them just had a small snippet of a lesbian couple, and a million moms had Hallmark take it down from the air. And I think about that all the time because it was 2019. How could that possibly be that a Facebook group could bully a network? And that's where you're breaking, it's brands and networks and distribution channels that need to stay strong and break the echo chamber, in my opinion, to make sure that there is saturation and representation, not just the volume of the work being made, but the eyeballs that then see it.
If anyone wants to jump, I mean, I think this is like a fascinating conversation. It's where it really comes into our lives, the degree to which it's an echo chamber. Are there any straight allies on the line who never see queer ads, and you're pretty sure it's because you're targeted with stuff that's just for you? Like advertising has gotten that specific. I mean, I know I think at least one friend on this who is afraid of ads like popping up on their phone because of a conversation that they had. Are we at that point where everything is so targeted that you're not really seeing stuff that's outside of your demos? Jess.
Yeah, I can't really recall the last time I saw an ad that was explicitly queer. I know that some of the brands that I like that are unisex, I sometimes get ads to, but that's really it. It's kind of crazy to like hear myself saying that out loud because I guess I just never. I mean, like in terms of targeting, like with TikTok, like I'm on like lesbian TikTok apparently, according to like the algorithms, just based off of like what I'm liking and stuff. But yeah, like in terms of targeted ads, like no, like I really don't get much outside of my own like gender or like sexual orientation. Excuse me.
Or both. I mean, that's when in lieu of the fact that they, are not targeting straight people as straight people. They're just like, well, okay, well, if you're, the baseline, then here's ads that will prove you're a woman. This is what a woman is.
And the weird thing is too, I don't even shop at places like J. Crew or Gap, and yet I get those ads. Like I can't tell you the last time I bought from one of those stores. I think I might have been in middle school.
I need to see your middle school pictures now with all the J. Crew. We'll talk about that later.
Just makes a really interesting point because, and then I started to think about our conversation about RuPaul's Drag Race and shows that are now, catapulted into the mainstream media, and that has sort of, in a sense, normalized or put a spotlight on drag culture. And I'm curious to know what, the straight population feels if they're watching that and then see an ad for like boy butter or some sort of like, very, very queer targeted ad, and that's on VH1. And then, to further bolster that point about inclusivity and the way in which queer people are represented in TV and film, doesn't that give brands a little bit more onus to lean in more queer if the characters or the storyline of certain shows are queer? And isn't that a way to sort of help enact change in the ad industry? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, to me, it harkens to something. I think it was like one of the first things that like, as a teenager that ever made me want to get into advertising or just start to think about advertising is the idea that for the most part, when people said that they didn't like an ad, it just meant that it wasn't for them. Right. And then and you could see that in like larger pop cultural stuff where it's like, this is a good show and this is a bad show. It's like, what you mean is that's a show that you like because it's for you. And that's a show that's not what you like, because it's not for you. And then if you have a little bit more like sort of discerning, like, you know, you take a step back and you take yourself out of it, you can sort of go like, oh, wow, it's interesting to like have acknowledgement of these. If I'm a straight person watching RuPaul's Drag Race, it's interesting. I'm not going to push these products or these ads away. I understand that I'm watching a show that was not made just for me. And thus I'm going to see ads that are not made just for me. And that's okay. You still, as a straight person, get knowledge of that product. And that's probably a pretty like essential, you know, cog somewhere in the machine of making people understand that, like, you know, there are brands that do support, like, you know, lots of different kinds of people, but a specific person, it's not you, and it doesn't mean it's not for you. If that made sense. So at this point, because we have just a few minutes left, actually, that kind of flew. Does anyone have any questions about Do the Work, or does anyone have any or items that they wanted to bring up? Because it's like, wow, how could you talk about queer culture and advertising and not bring up this point? Did we solve it? Are we done? Wow.
You just disband now. I mean, it's,
Yeah, no, that's it. I didn't know that we were going to fix it so fast. I guess I want to start by thanking all of you for being a huge part of a national solution. Does anyone have any questions about, you know, what's coming up to Do the Work, or any other, like, you know, as we go along, y'all, you have to discuss this. We're going to have more conversations like this. So I would actually love specifically, more specifically, if anyone had topics about, like, please make sure we have a discussion just around blank. I'm putting everyone on the spot. Oh, we have a hand raised. Yes. Thank you, Jess.
I just have I mean, is there a way we can beat the algorithms? I would love to know if there's a way around that, whether it's through like our own participation in certain, you know, social channels, or how we're engaging with content, even if it has to be done by us doing that.
It's a really, really good question. Oh, wait, Mike is raising his hand for that.
So I think what can help with that a lot is sharing content. So the algorithms will continue to show you content based on, say, past behavior, or who you follow, sites you visited, things like that. All the things that programmatic advertisers are probably making sure that that content reaches you. But what I think is also helpful, there's an infographic I saw a few days ago around Black Lives Matter. And I think it's still very true. When you're sharing content, it brings it through the funnel of who is seeing that content. So I'm getting served very queer content. I share that with my sister, who is straight, in a relationship, has a dog, and her followers follow her for whatever it may be. Maybe it's because they like her dog pics. Those people then, if she shares my post or my thing that I share with her, they see that content. So I think it's a matter of how do we facilitate sharing, whether that is a group chat or whether that is something where you and your friends say, oh, hey, like, I haven't been seeing any of this lately. Can you share me if you see a really great ad that you think would be of, you know, my interests? And I think what helps with that too is open communication at work, where there's maybe a Slack channel and in Office IM where you can keep track of those things. And that way it helps everyone catch all the pieces that they may not normally get through the algorithm. Because at the end of the day, like, we can all fight the algorithm as much as we want to, but there are actions that we take outside of Facebook or outside of Instagram that are probably also being tracked. So unless we completely change our purchase behaviors and what we're buying and what websites we're going to for media consumption, we'll probably have to fight a lot of the same battles unless we actively help to give each other the things that we're not seeing.
Very interesting. Anyone else have any other, does anyone have a response to Mike's stuff about the algorithm and how we're, you know, living in the matrix, etc.? All right, well, we are just at about our time. I want to thank everyone for everything that they shared today, and for their patience as we embarked on our first episode of Open Office Hours. So you're all amazing. Your voices are so important, and we aim to amplify them further with further conversations. Check out the next session. Find the schedule, which we're updating at dothework.com, and that's obviously spelled WERQ. At the website, you can also sign up for more email updates, and then also in community connection activities. We're also, we have an email list that goes out with stuff, but also when you go to the site, you'll be able to click on specific episodes you want to see to add them to your calendar. Follow us at Do the Work on Twitter and Instagram, and of course you can find us on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. And on the site, you can also go to the contact field if you want to suggest future suggestions and conversation topics. Seriously, so grateful for everyone who showed up for this first discussion. It will only get bigger from here. Thank you all for watching, and for now, bye.